I have written 8 books as of the time of filming this video, and today I'm going to share with you my entire process for how I like to plot my novels. Every writer is different, and there is no one way to do anything in writing. Anyone who claims that there is only one way to do anything when it comes to writing or art in general is lying to you, but this is the only way that I have found works for me, so I'm going to take you behind the curtain and share everything that I do when I'm planning my novel from the very first idea stage to when I actually start writing. I am also a plotter. Not everybody is going to agree with the things that I say in this video or do, but my brain has to have an outline in order to be able to start writing the book. I need to be able to figure out some of the mechanics of how the story is going to work before I put pen to paper in order for me to write the book. Otherwise, I get really overwhelmed and jam up and don't know what I'm doing. So you might work differently and like to pants your writing or just draft and see where the story takes you instead of planning to the level of detail that I do. There might still be a nugget of something in here that resonates with you or gives you an idea of something that you can try as you're developing your own plotting and outlining process. So with all that being said, here's how I like to plot my books. I'm going to go through each stage and share my screen and show you exactly what I do at every step of the way. So the first thing that I do when I'm plotting a book, I have a great idea for a book. Maybe it's very broad and it's kind of vague, but it's just a premise that really captures my attention, is I do a general brainstorm. This is my big picture brainstorming session where I'm just trying to iron out a couple of the details of this story. I'm not trying to figure out the entire story, but just put a little bit more shape to a pretty vague idea I had, just to get a better grasp on what exactly it is that my idea was. So let's say that I have an idea for a book that is a creepy circus comes to town and kills people. A horror book. Maybe it'll just be kind of like a one-off story about, I don't know, like a girl who goes to the circus and everything goes really wrong and all of the things in the circus start slowly trying to kill her. Killer circus, must survive. Like a survival horror book about circuses, because circuses are really scary. That's our general premise. So now I just like to do a brain dump onto the page to try and come up with as many ideas and just let the creative juices flow as much as I can to just try to have something to work with. Like, I have this idea, I know what the vibe is, but I have no idea what the specifics are. I don't know who the characters are. I don't know how the circus is creepy. I don't know any of the logistics of the circus. So we're not going to get bogged down into the details of all that. We're just going to do a very low pressure, low stakes brain dump. I find that as soon as I put pressure on myself this early in the process, I can clam up a little bit and be like, the idea's bad. I'm just not even going to go forward with it at all. So I don't like going there. I just keep everything really low pressure so I can see whether there's something here or not. So let's say you have killer circus. Why is it scary? Because the performers are killers. Do you want to make it supernatural or do you want to make it realistic? If we make it supernatural, then they can be some kind of monster. I feel like maybe it's more realistic if it's just some sort of killer. So maybe we don't even do the entire circus is in on it. Maybe we just have it so there's a serial killer. Can you tell that I write thrillers? Serial killer in circus. That's not how you spell it. I'm an author, okay? Serial killer in circus. Goes on spree, girl must survive killer and stop killer, let's just say. But it will be a one-day horror book. The serial killer can be the clown because of course. So naturally the next question is who is this clown and why does he want to kill people? So you can say I don't know, if we can use real life serial killers as inspiration. I actually don't know that much about what's his face? This is embarrassing. John Wayne Gacy. Thank you, Google. But you can use real life killers as inspiration just for the purposes of today, because this is going to be a very rough general idea to just give you the idea of like what the process looks like. We'll say, I don't know, killer like likes being a clown, but maybe their like ex came into town and brought her like teen daughter or something, and then the clown like got rejected by the woman like years ago and now wants to like take revenge on the daughter, and that anger is kind of what starts the spree, and he like accidentally kills someone else, and then he feels like he's backed into a corner, and then he just kind of goes on a little bit of a murder rampage at the circus. Clown rampage. Okay, so why can't they all leave, and like why can't they call the police? Because this would all be shut down very quickly if the police were involved. So you have to come up with like, why not call police? That is a very good question. Why not call police? Because maybe the bodies weren't found right away. Like maybe nobody knows that he was on a rampage. Or maybe it was like super rural circus. So it's hard for the police to get out there. Like maybe they just don't know. I think it's just that like the murders have to be going on like hush hush. Like it's not like he's like out there swinging. Like it's kind of like behind doors, and then as the story goes on, the bodies are discovered and the police is called in, but they still like the police are like working with the people, and they can't find the guy because you don't know who the guy is. Maybe you don't know that it's a killer clown. Okay. You don't know it's killer clown, so everybody in the circus looks suspicious. Great. So the entire story is basically this girl. It takes place on in one day. We'll kind of call this a novella, and she is like, these people are getting murdered. Maybe she like finds a body or something, and then the police gets called in, so it's not really hush hush. Like at the beginning she finds a body and the police get called in, and then they have to figure out who the killer was. No, but then they would shut down the circus. This is like a little more confusing than I thought it would be. Okay, scratch all of this. Let's make this a little bit easier to understand. Creepy circus comes to town and kills people. It's a horror book. Girl takes job at circus. Everything seems normal until things go weird. Gets more creepy. Bodies start showing up in this, like at the midpoint maybe. She can't quit the job. Why? Because, I don't know, her uncle is her guardian and he owns the circus. Or she has nowhere else to go. Runaway, homeless. And as she maybe feels like someone is killing her friends in the circus, and she feels like she will be the next victim, so she must stop killer before it's too late. Cool. So that is about as far as I get when I'm mapping out the general brainstorm. I can start brain dumping vibes, settings, towns, characters, just if I have anything that I have in my brain that I want to get on there, I can treat this as like I'm going to sketch everything out and just brain dump. I would probably, if I was writing this for real, I would brain dump more than this, but because this is a video, I don't want it to get too boring. So just imagine I put a lot more about that, like, you know, maybe it's in Kansas and there's corn and, you know, it's a county fair kind of thing, or like maybe that's the vibe I want for the story, or maybe, you know, the girl's parents died, or like she was raised by her grandparents and her grandpa has the circus, or her grandpa's the strongman. That would be kind of cool. Like just dumping as much info as I want to in there. Trying to figure out kind of who the killer is too. Like actually who is the killer? Like it's a mystery, but there has to be a killer. So why is he killing? And then why does he ultimately target the girl? Is it because she fits a victimology? Is it because she does something? Is it because she's on to him and he wants to neutralize the threat? What is his ultimate plan, goal, etc.? After I have a sketch of ideas that I'm happy with, I move on to the next step in my process, which is come up with a logline. A logline is a one-sentence elevator pitch for your novel. It's a very short 1 to 2 sentence pitch that conveys the main character of your story, the conflict, the antagonist, and what's at stake. This is a common screenwriting device. A lot of people who pitch movies use log lines, but it's also very important when pitching books. Here are some examples of log lines of famous movies as provided by the website industrialscripts.com. For Mr. and Mrs. Smith, when husband and wife assassins discover they are working for rival agencies, they have to decide whether to put love ahead of business. Or Finding Nemo, when his son is swept out to sea, an anxious clownfish embarks on a perilous journey across a treacherous ocean to bring him back. Titanic, a 17-year-old aristocrat falls in love with a kind but poor artist aboard the luxurious, ill-fated RMS Titanic. Or The Godfather, the aging patriarch of an organized crime dynasty transfers control of his clandestine empire to his reluctant son. Each of these give you an idea of the characters, the conflict, and the stakes. Like in the first one, husband and wife assassins. This is clearly going to be a rivalry, that they're both assassins and they're both pitted against each other. That is going to be the conflict. You already know that it's going to be a husband and wife. You already know that the conflict is going to be that they're assassins and have to work against each other. And what's at stake is clearly their love and their relationship and their marriage. Or for Titanic, the characters. You have the aristocrat, you have the poor artist, and you clearly have a conflict because they're falling in love. And in the background, what's at stake is everybody knows that the RMS Titanic sunk. And so you are immediately interested as to whether or not they survived, and that clearly is going to present a conflict in that story. This is a really good exercise to boil down your story into just the simplest pitch possible. It prevents you from getting really complicated when you're brainstorming and just makes your story very simple, and so you understand exactly what it is that you're writing. So for our killer circus idea, we're going to take the character, the conflict, and what's at stake. The character is like girl working at circus. The conflict is bodies showing up, like killer on the loose. What's at stake? Her own life. So let's say like 16, if you're going to write YA, your old girl takes summer job, or like down on her, or like, I don't know, down on her luck, 16-year-old girl takes a job at a struggling circus and has to fight to stay alive when her when the other performers start showing up dead. This is pretty wordy. I would try to get this down and boil this down into like the best pitch that it could be, but that generally captures what this story is about. So we know that this is going to be our main character, the girl, that the fight for survival is going to be the general conflict, and the antagonist is going to be whoever is making the other performers show up dead. That immediately gives our story some structure and it gives it some shape. We know that we're not telling the story of the uncle, we're not telling the story from the point of view of the serial killer. It keeps it simple. So once I have a logline and a general idea, I move on to trying to figure out who the main characters of this story are. So in our case, the main characters would be the girl, our main character protagonist, who takes this summer job at the circus, and would also be the killer, even though we don't see the killer on the page. The killer and antagonist is just as important as your protagonist and can make or break your story, especially if you're writing in a genre like this. Here's where I would also explore, do I want to have a romance? then maybe I'll sketch out a love interest character. Who is that main character? What does she want? Why is she down on her luck? Why does she take that job at the circus? Why can't she leave? Why does she want to solve this mystery? Why does the killer target her? And why doesn't she immediately run away as fast as she can? Why does she feel the need to stay and save the other people in the circus? This at the beginning might be external factors, like she actually has to be working there. She has some sort of reason why she physically cannot leave and has to be there. Maybe she just got out of jail. Probably not at 16 if you age it up. She just got out of jail and there aren't as many people who are going to hire her. And so she gets a job at the circus and it's not like she has a lot of options and she has no money. But by the end, she has come to really care about everyone. They have accepted her as a found family and she's made some friends. And that's why she feels the need to go and solve this mystery because nobody else will. Let's just say. Or maybe she tries to leave and the killer follows her. If you're going with the found family approach and she really feels like she's found her people here and she wants to save them, maybe she has a best friend character, and so that's a character that you would add to the story. I don't usually figure out everything about these characters because I discover a lot as I'm writing, but I come pretty close. I like to have a full physical description. I like to understand their background and general psychology, what their outlook on life is, what their personality is like, whether they're optimistic or pessimistic. I don't really need to know their favorite brand of cereal, that's not important. But I like to know what their voice is and what their voice sounds like. If they're overly cynical, if they're snarky, if they're happy, if they're gentle, if they're generally peppy, if they're very smart, if they're nerdy, if they're anxious. I spend some time digging into their heads, and this is where I really feel like the story starts to come to life. I'm a very character-driven writer, and it's hard for me to care about a story that I'm writing if I haven't really lived with the characters. So I do my best. I treat this seriously, and I take a lot of time on this step because I want to make sure that I know my characters as much as I can and as well as I can at this stage. So I go into my first draft with an idea of who they are, and then I can discover things as I'm writing about their backstory or just about how they are generally as a person. Or if they have to do something for a plot reason, I will work backwards and figure out a way to justify that. But for this story, I'm just going to do a couple of characters. Let's just say we have Grace. She's the girl who works at the circus. Let's say maybe she's not 16 because this is going to be kind of mature. Let's say she's 19. Let's just say she just got out of jail for what? Something bad, maybe? For manslaughter or something really bad. She didn't mean to do it, but she did something really bad and someone got really hurt and she carries that guilt around with her every day. If I were writing this book, I would figure out exactly what it was. The readers don't find out about it until later on in the story because we don't want to show her hand too quickly. She spent some time in jail, so she's pretty pessimistic. She has no money. No one will hire her. No family. Let's say maybe none of her family will talk to her after what happened. She didn't mean to do it. It was an accident. She wants to be better. She's trying, but she is just really down on her luck and she doesn't like herself very much and she carries around that guilt. So her narrative voice, I think, will be pretty cynical. I would say snarky and cynical, but she has a soft spot. But she's just a girl and she has a soft spot for animals. She's actually sensitive, but she's just been hardened, but has been hardened because of what has happened to her. And then I would try to find maybe some comp characters, if there are characters from TV shows that remind me of her, then I would list out a couple of comp characters so that I can maybe go and watch a couple episodes and just see how they talk and get a little bit of inspiration for how I want to create this character's voice. And then I create the character's voice and I try to write monologues from that character's voice. This is a more involved process, so I can't do it just for the video, but I always do that before I start writing, especially if I'm writing from the first person, where I have to write the book from their point of view. Once I'm pretty happy with that, and I know some of the main characters of the story, I move on to the actual plotting process, and the first step that I do is I map out my story arc. I approach this by starting very big picture and narrowing it down over time. So I start really simple and I start at the top, kind of like an upside down triangle. I start right at the top and I try to map out the entire broad general story structure. I have a big whiteboard that I use for doing this. It's like a, I don't know, 3x4 foot whiteboard on the wall, and I will draw out this story arc on the whiteboard. It looks kind of like a squiggly snake, like this. And I start with figuring out 5 basic plot points: the point of entry, the inciting incident, the midpoint, the climax, and the resolution. The point of entry is the very first time we meet the characters. It's the introduction to the main character of the story. The inciting incident is when the story really starts and where the conflict kicks in. The midpoint is where everything in the book shifts, and it's where everything, like the giant big plot twist change turning point. The climax is where the conflict finally comes to a head, and the resolution is where everything resolves and the book ends. Based on this story, I would say that the point of entry is going to be Grace going and starting her first day at the circus. It will be her first day on the job. I'm not going to do the interview because then you have too much stuff that has to happen before she actually starts. So it will be her first day. And that will be very easy because when you write stories like that where a character has a first day, it's also the reader's first introduction to the story. So the character and the reader are getting introduced at the same time, which is cool and makes it easy for the writer. So point of entry will be Grace's first day. She will be very nervous. Maybe she'll be like preparing, like we'll do stuff to show her character. Like if she's really nervous, like she really wants this to work, she could change her outfit a couple of times, be really fidgety with herself, have some social mishaps, as we all do when we get nervous. The inciting incident is going to be when the first creepy thing happens, where something tips her off that something is not quite right. The first half of this, for this general outline, I don't know if this is the best way to do it, but for the purposes of this video, we'll have the first half of the book be the tense, suspenseful ramp up to there just being something weird happening at the circus. She's getting to know people, but things are not quite right. And then the midpoint will be when the first body turns up. It will soon turn into a mystery thriller whodunit, because by this point, Grace apparently will be too invested in the circus to just hightail and quit and run, because if we put a body showing up on her first day, she probably wouldn't go back for a second day, but if it's been a little while and then the first body shows up, and maybe that body is even of one of her friends, then she's going to be invested. The climax is when the killer tries to kill her and she survives and she's able to stop the killer, and the resolution is where they either arrest the killer or the killer is dead and everybody recovers and lives to see another day. Now, depending on the book that you're writing, you can put your own artistic spin on this. This is not the only way to plot this novel, but that is my vision for this particular idea at this moment. So that's where I start, just with those 5 plot points. And this gives me a framework for how I want the entire story to play out. I will write these plot points down on the story arc, and after that is done, I move on to the next stage in my process, which is my sticky notes stage. Honestly, the sticky notes stage is my favorite. It is the most fun I have while plotting and outlining a book. I crank some fun music, I take a wad of sticky notes, like the little post-it notes, and I brainstorm as many scenes as I can think of that could fit into this story. And because I put my story grid on that giant whiteboard, I take the sticky notes and I physically stick them on the story arc so I can see generally where they would fit in. A lot of these ideas are going to be awful. Most of them are not going to end up in the final book, but it's just me brainstorming things that could happen. Like, she meets a really cool person in the circus that becomes her best friend. Her uncle, the strong man, is like lifting weights in the room and she goes in to have a conversation with him. She thinks she's being followed home by the killer. Oh no! The police come to talk to everybody at the circus. She goes and gets cinnamon rolls with her new best friend in the circus. She is forced to perform in the circus and sub in for someone, and it's super embarrassing. She has to go through the bleachers selling popcorn to people, and she thinks she sees the killer in the audience and she chases him, but it turns out not to be him. Just a brain dump of everything I can think of. I put on the sticky notes and I physically stick them to my story arc. Even though most of these ideas will be dumb, some of them in there will actually be decent nuggets to use as a basis point for me starting to outline the book scene by scene. I don't let my critical mind into this process. Like, I'm listening to my tunes, I'm outlining as fast as I can, and I don't let myself take anything off of those arcs because I don't think that they're good enough. I just put everything I possibly can on there, and then I save that critical mind for later. But once my whiteboard is just covered in Post-its, I do move on to the next stage, which is maybe turning off the music, taking a break, stepping away from it, coming back to it maybe the next day or a couple hours later, and deciding which scenes I actually want to keep in there and which ones are absolute gibberish. Because there's more to a story than just those flag post plot points. Like in the first half of the story, we would need to have a rising action of her discovering that something's not quite right in the circus. So every scene has to kind of build on itself. We can't just have a random hodgepodge of randomly organized ideas. We have to have like one little tiny thing that happens that's not quite right. And then she doesn't think anything of it. She goes to get cinnamon rolls with her friend. And then she comes back and something slightly bigger and weird is happening. She overhears a really strange conversation. She feels like she's being followed. She tries to push that aside, and then something even bigger and more weird happens. Every scene builds on itself until that midpoint where that first body turns up. Because then it's going to stop being a suspenseful, am I making it up, or is there something weird with the circus? And then it will start being like, oh, there's definitely a killer here, and we need to catch him before I'm the next victim. So this is where I start to get a little bit more into the details, and I move more things around until I've generally come up with a narrative structure that holds together semi-coherently. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. There are going to be holes in it, but I can also fill this in. Like I might not have thought of everything. I definitely haven't in my sticky notes phase. And maybe I need to come up with another scene that fills a certain hole in this part of the plot, and then I'll write it on the sticky note and put it there. And I will reorganize it until I have a chain of sticky notes that are mostly coherent, that go one into the other all the way up and down the story arc and lead between each story plot point. Once I have that, I move on to creating my plot grid. A plot grid is a type of outline popularized by J.K. Rowling that is made on a grid format instead of linearly. It's how J.K. Rowling outlined the Harry Potter books. I read an article on it, I tried it, I fell in love with it, I've been obsessed with it ever since. The grid looks something like this. Every single column in this plot grid corresponds to a plot or subplot in the book, and every row corresponds to a chapter. So you can dedicate columns to like your main mystery plot, to your romantic subplots, and then you can track them throughout every chapter of your book to make sure that each of them follows an arc. There's development, there's change, there are things that are happening, and you don't ignore anything for too long in your book. I go through anywhere between like maybe 5 to 7 plot grids for every single book that I write. The first thing I do after I've completed a draft is write what I've drafted into a plot grid so that I can more analytically look at the big picture of the story and determine what edits and rewrites and changes that I need to make to it. But the first plot grid I make is like my zero draft plot grid. I take all of the things from the sticky notes, I write them down, and I put them into the grid. These all go in like the main plot, or most of them go into the main plot category. So this would be like the girl discovering something's wrong in the circus and then trying to stop the killer. That's the general premise. That's the plot that your logline talks about. But there might be other plots too, like maybe she has a budding romance with another like cute guy in the circus, and then that's another subplot column. Maybe she has her friendship with one of the victims, that's another column. She has her own character growth where she learns to forgive herself for the bad thing that she did before and redeem herself maybe by stopping this killer this time. So that character change would be its own column. But I put everything into the plot grid, and then in my next stage, I flesh out everything in that plot grid. So I figure out what columns I want. Do I want there to be a romance? Do I want there to be a friendship? What about her relationship with her uncle? If her uncle hired her, is there something going on there? Is it boring? Is it something more layered? This relationship probably has to develop and change. I'm going to make it a column. And then I give every single column a rough outline. So every single column has to follow some sort of story arc. They also have to have like a conflict, an inciting incident, a climax. And so I figure out what those are and I put them in each column. So the romance, like the inciting incident would be they meet, and then the climax, like there would be some sort of conflict. Maybe, you know, she likes him and he has commitment issues, and then that's their conflict. And then the climax is like they kiss for the first time and he overcomes his commitment issues and they live happily ever after, and that would be the end of that little romantic subplot. And all this would be happening, you know, while they're trying to catch the serial killer, because of course. And only once I have a completed, fleshed out plot grid with a rough arc of where I want the story to go, do I start drafting my very first draft? And even then, I usually only get maybe halfway through the book on my first try. Not always. Sometimes I'll get like all the way up until the climax, but I never get all the way through a book. I never make it past the climax until my very last draft of the book, because I can't bring myself to write something that I know is going to change so fundamentally as I continue developing the first half of the book. I've always had to throw out climaxes, so it's now I have like this mental block when it comes to writing climaxes. So my general drafting process looks like plot grid, draft, then I take the draft and I retroactively write a plot grid of what I have. I redo the plot grid and like in the plot grid, and I add stuff, I delete stuff, I change stuff around, and then I use that new plot grid as my plan for my next draft, and I go back and forth until I have a draft that I really like. And the characters will change as I learn more about them. A lot of the times I'll discover plot holes and then stuff in the plot will change, but this is the work that I do before ever putting fingers to keyboard and starting to write chapter 1. I will not start writing a book until I've done all of the things that I just told you. It took me a long time to come up with this process. It took many instances of plotting a book and failing and coming up with different plot holes and trying to fix them and not knowing how and getting overwhelmed and finishing the book and trying again on a different book and running into a different problem on that one and running into timeline issues. All of that stuff led me to creating this process that works for me. I've written, I think, like 2 books now, 2 or 3 books following this process that have been pretty seamless. It's been the best experiences that I've had drafting a book have been the past 2 books that I've written following this process. It was simple, it was easy. I mean, it wasn't easy because writing a book is still hard, but figuring all of this stuff at the beginning prevented me from actually writing the book with all these plot holes that could have been avoided with a little bit of work in the plot grid. And it has really helped my brain to just jump into drafting, and then when I get overwhelmed, go back to the drawing board and take a step back, and then jump back into drafting and then take a step back, and use this process of both the plot grid and the draft to organically come up with a book. And it gives me a little bit of structure having a step-by-step process. The only way to develop your own writing process is by experimenting a lot and trying a bunch of new things. This is why I think YouTube is such a great resource for writers, because you get to hear from so many different writers and get to learn from them and see how they approach these same tasks, because everybody wants to write a book, but every writer has a slightly different approach to doing so. So it's really interesting to be able to learn from a bunch of different people and experiment and try all the different things to see if they work for you or not. Practicing is the only way that you are able to hone your process. I have a pretty solid process now, but it took me a little while to get there. I published my first book when I was in high school, and I did not follow an outlining or drafting process at all. I just wrote as much as I could whenever I could and fell in love with the story and had a ton of fun doing it, and generally followed some sort of plot structure, but it wasn't very clear and I didn't really know what I was doing. But it internalized the idea of having a narrative arc. This book taught me so much about pacing and plotting and plot points. I was able to put names to things like the midpoint and understand how that functioned in a story and start approaching my writing from a much more technical viewpoint. I had a tough time drafting this book. I had a full draft and then I sent it to beta readers and figured out that there were some really big plot holes of it. And so I think just a couple months before release day, I threw everything in the garbage and I started from scratch. And it was one of the most stressful writing experiences of my life, but really taught me to trust my instincts and about the importance of rising action and maintaining tension throughout an entire narrative. This book, the 3rd book in the series, taught me a ton about constructing climaxes and how to put together a plot that pushes every single character to their limits and makes them face their worst fears. And it taught me just a lot about forcing my characters to grow and how to piece that climax together like a puzzle and work backwards to make sure that the story is leading up to that properly. And this book, the 4th one, which this is an art copy of it, I have a real copy of it somewhere around here, taught me a lot about pacing and a lot about character work and how to balance plot and character when you have a lot of material that you want to cram into a book. I just finished writing the 5th one in the series and have written a couple of other projects in tandem with that series that I haven't published yet over the years. And now I have a pretty clear system for how I like to approach everything, and I wouldn't have been able to get there if I hadn't actually been boots on the ground writing and trying to figure out how to implement all of these things that I was learning. My method may not work for you depending on what kind of writer you are, but if any of this resonated with you, I highly recommend just giving it a try and seeing what you think. It took a lot of me listening to other writers talk about what worked for them and then trying out what worked for them and realizing that it either did or didn't work for me to come up with this and figure out that this is something that really works. So that's it for this video on how I like to plot and outline my books. I hope that it was helpful to you. If you have a second, I would be super grateful if you could like this video and also subscribe to my channel. My name is Claire Fraze, and I'm an award-winning author who makes videos sharing actionable writing tips that helped me make my own writing better, as well as taking you behind the scenes on my own personal writing process like I do in this one. I am the author of the paranormal thriller They Stay series, which tells the story of a 16-year-old girl whose younger brother goes missing and is kidnapped by this evil necromancer who wants to bring back another ghost inside his body, and it's like a creepy kind of horror Stranger Things-like story of these 4 kids, teenagers that try to stop him. So that clearly is not the logline. That was my rambling explanation. But if you are interested in checking those out, or if they sound like they're up your alley, I have linked them in the description of this video. Are you also a plotter? And do you do any of the same things that I do when you outline your books? Let me know down in the comments. I would love to hear what your personal process is, and if you have found something that works for you. I hope you have a great week, everybody. And as always, happy writing.